Welcome to the Wolf Power Club, the weekly podcast where we discuss energy, industry and politics. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Wolf Power Club, the #1 energy podcast on Apple. And today we're on the road and we've got a very special guest. You guys know him as JayEmm. I'm going to call you James throughout the meeting. But can we welcome a man who's got over 400,000 subscribers, over 138 million views on YouTube. James, welcome to the Wolf Power Club podcast.
Is it that many?
Yeah.
I don't count anymore. That's quite nice, that. Oh, that's lovely. Yeah, I like that. I can get used to that.
Yeah, I mean, that's like bigger than some countries in Europe. I mean, like 138 million is bigger than most countries in Europe.
Yeah. I mean, if each person had watched my video once and then gone, no more, thank you very much, which would be kind of quite damning, really. If my returning viewers was nil, that would be the most painful, sad statistic I'd ever seen.
But for our listeners today, I am obviously passionate about the fuel industry, but we are passionate on the podcast about the industry that fuel actually goes to. And one of the biggest is the car industry. And looking at, where we are today, Britain is still obsessed by the cars. I was looking at the RSC Foundation. I must be honest, James, I was looking for a story about people are no longer interested in cars. But the reality is we're at 41.3 million car ownership in Britain, according to the last figures. And actually every year car ownership has gone up in this country, bar two, and one of those was a COVID year. Why do you think that since World War II, Brits have been so obsessed with car ownership and car culture?
Well, I think in the wake of the war in particular, cars, I think, was something that had been aspirational before in the extreme. Of course, the likes of Henry Ford had done a great deal to make the car a lot more accessible and affordable. Then, following on from the war, we had, of course, a large number of cars from before it that were available. You also will have had a lot of people that might not have had a chance to drive full stop, then drive because of what they had to do during the war. Whole sections of society would have experienced a freedom and an independence that they hadn't before. And simply put, and I think this is a global thing, this is not British at all, people had gone through hell. And at the end of it, they would have said, well, okay, we've had some really, really tough times. Like, we want something for it, And the car was, I think, one of the key things that people wanted, because it connected society in a way I think that's only been equaled by the internet. Suddenly you could go from A to B whenever, however, with whoever you wanted. And that's an incredibly exciting thing.
And I think what also blows my mind is, fast forward to today, even when people have got so many other choices of what they can do, what transport they can take, meeting people virtually, you still see that the passion, I can see it in your own channel, the fact that you've got so many followers. People are intrigued about what's out there, not just new stuff, but modern stuff, old stuff, classics. And you must see those various niches, from those passionate about Italian cars through to passionate about Japanese cars. It's something almost like a friend to them, isn't it? There seems to be a relationship like no other object, really.
Yeah, I think it was William Lyons who said that the car is the closest we may come to creating a living being. Cars do have a soul, and occasionally it's the soul of a pernickety, difficult, curmudgeonly old devil that doesn't want to be particularly helpful. And sometimes it's the soul of a passionate lover that, is probably best for a weekend and maybe not for life. But cars, obviously between the post-war period and today, they've gone through a lot of different iterations. They were a necessity for a lot of people, for their work, for their daily lives, so on and so forth. For some of them, it was their work. For some of them, it's how they get to work. Where we are here in the East Anglian countryside, we're surrounded by a lot of farmland. So, of course, you had a lot of rural communities here. So even though I know a lot of people sort of 60 years ago didn't have a car themselves, there was somebody in the village that did, and of course the farms themselves had all sorts of tractors and other farm machinery. As time went on, of course, as it becomes a bit more common for people to just have a car, then it becomes, okay, how do you distinguish between different people? And of course, as time went on and people got more money, the idea of luxury cars becomes more of a thing. And I think, as human beings, it's in our nature to judge people based on a first impression.
Yeah.
And that does stick, no matter how erroneous it may be. And if you're going to go and see somebody with the car, then I think it does say something about you. A lovely chap called Rich once said to me, interesting people drive interesting cars. You've come here today in yours, and that's not a car that anybody has ever bought by accident. So even on the driveway at the minute, I've got my partner's car, which is a dinky little 3-door RAV4, which I've actually been quite enjoying with it as cold as it is, and people watching on video will be able to see that it is pretty chilly in here in my garage. And I think we've got to the stage now where, cars they're almost something that we idolize for some people, and they're a bit of in some ways, I think maybe a secondary thing, because most people that hanker after a particular car, be it an Aston Martin, a Ferrari, a Rolls Royce, or something like that, when you talk to them about it, there's very few people I actually ever meet who just wanted to own the fastest car in the world, or the most expensive car in the world, or something like that. This does happen occasionally. Stuff like the McLaren F1 is a great example. But there'll be a lot of people who, when you actually press them on their dream car, it'll wind up being some childhood memory, often of a chance encounter, or maybe one day they saw a special on the TV about a footballer or a movie star or someone driving their own car, or maybe even they've seen a film or something like that. They've been, Ford Anglias would be worth nothing if it weren't for Harry Potter. And that's what I also love about the car, is that the unlikeliest of ways can get people into cars for reasons that we otherwise would never have fathomed. 20-year-olds today want a Ford Anglia 105e, and the only reason that they want one is Harry Potter. Otherwise, it would be just a sort of, footnote in history.
I think you're spot on, James, because I think that, like one of the cars brands that I really love is because back in the early 90s, I went to the Earls Court Motor Show. I was a little kid. I obviously wasn't going to buy that supercar, but one of those brands actually allowed me on their stand, gave me a laminated brochure, and as you said, for 20 minutes, I felt like an owner of that car. And that salesman probably had an inkling, and then obviously 30 years later, thanks to the energy industry, I've been lucky enough to get it. But I think I also meet other people. I'm a very successful businessman. He could pretty much have any car, but he's got a TVR. And the reason he's got a TVR is he loved the band The Shadows. And when he was a kid in his hometown, one of the members of The Shadows drove a TVR. And it's those sort of weird things that trigger why you go.
And also, and this is where I think cars don't sometimes deserve the stick that they get. How many hard days did you have at work? How many early starts and mornings did you have? And you thought, I'm going in because doing this will let me have that car. The first 3-4 years that I did YouTube, it was because I was determined, like, one day there will be a Ferrari on that driveway, damn it. And you're like, this is the only way I can see of making it happen. And it helps you get through those early mornings, those cold starts, those difficult times when it doesn't really seem to be getting you anywhere. And I don't know. I just love that about it. I mean, and also it's so social. The amount of people, we're here because of cars. It's not the energy industry. It's not the film industry. That's where we've both come from. But we've wound up here because of cars.
Yeah, it's our Venn diagram where we meet. James, that was a great, in-depth why people are passionate about cars. But let's bring us forward to 2025. And we've got a situation where it looks like Tesla and BYD are competing over that electric market. I think the growth in the last 12 months has been something north of 30% for BYD. What do you feel the impact is on the car industry, having this American versus Chinese brands that don't have a huge amount of heritage, but look like they're about to take over the world market, and that is going to be the drive and the effect on the European car market?
Well, first off, I do actually have some fairly serious concerns that on a global scale, things are about to get really unpleasant. America already has very significant, I think 100% tariffs on Chinese-made EVs. There is a suggestion from their incoming president, or incoming at the time of recording, that he has no issue whatsoever with increasing tariffs on not just those cars, but potentially others as well. This almost certainly will lead to retaliatory action from foreign automakers, in this case particularly the Chinese. What we also have affecting us here in the UK and in continental Europe is this kind of just unreal, somewhat unique situation that I don't think we've really ever been in before, whereby the lawmakers have decided, rightly or wrongly, that we are to transition towards a zero emissions future.
Yeah.
And in practice, that means for the car industry chiefly EVs.
Yeah.
There are, of course, lots of other alternatives and suggestions and other ideas, but right here, right now, the only one that seems to be, making any sort of meaningful gains is just, battery electric vehicles, and of course, plug-in hybrids are a bit of a stepping stone, but we're never ever going to be, the end goal. The problem is that I think. It reminds me a little bit of a sketch from The Simpsons. I can't remember exactly the episode, and there's that famous picture of someone going, well, using our current projections in the next 2 years, sales will be off the charts. And I think the problem is that the early adopters and the people who were keen and happy to buy into EVs in the early days were very, very happy to put up with the issues, the pitfalls, the drawbacks and things that they had, because they also did come with some real serious benefits. Yeah. I've been driving EVs for about 6 years now, so I wasn't really a super early adopter, but I was doing it before a lot of other people were. Yeah. And back then, it was actually quite easy. The charging points were relatively few and far between, but they were also all chiefly either free or very cheap, because at the time there were huge incentives from every angle, from the purchase to the charging to everything else, to get people into this new technology. I mean, I went basically to sort of prove somebody wrong from here in East Anglia to Scotland.
Wow.
And back in an EV, and it cost me £8.
Oh wow, £8 for that.
£8, and I was furious that it cost me that much, because I had to rely on two public chargers. One I could find that was free, and the other unfortunately charged money. But it cost me £8 to get to Scotland. So at that point in time, you said, okay, all right, there are some drawbacks and things with these, but Scotland for £8. Right?
Incredible.
Even the most economical of diesels or whatever just couldn't compete. Today, to do that same journey, if I were to rely on a public charging network, and of course you're going to want fast chargers. If you're doing any sort of large distance, you're going to want fast chargers. The cost would be astronomical. For your reference, back then, most of the chargers I could find were free. What I would term like normal price was 12 pence per kilowatt hour, and the extortionate rip-off motorway services that I was determined not to use, the Ecotricity was basically it at the time, was 35 pence a kilowatt hour. Now, to find a public charge that's 35 pence a kilowatt hour would be considered near miraculous. And a lot of the fast chargers, we don't have many around here, but the ones that do exist are more like 80 pence per kilowatt hour. So the cost has gone up by a factor of 6.
Well, I saw a fascinating thing, James, on that, in that they did this massive test. What's the range of the latest electric cars? The winner was an Ioniq 5. It did 333 miles. But interesting, using on-road charge points to do that 333 miles and recharge actually cost them more than the diesel Skoda that was actually supporting the filming of the event. It comes to that point in that I think if it was home charging with the on-road stuff, it would have come to £92, but straight on the road stuff came to £134. But coming back to my question on it then, in terms of the European car industry, Do you think those raising costs of electric could actually be the saviour of the likes of your BMWs, your German manufacturers, because electric doesn't have the cost advantage, therefore you might not go for a BYD or Tesla long term?
So the part two of all of this is that we are in this situation whereby manufacturers have been told, it has been made law. I think a lot of people are on this misunderstanding that we've got the 2035 date, and obviously here in Britain it's flitted from 2035 to 2030 back to 2035 for complete 100% new sales of zero emission vehicles. And I think a lot of people assume, well, on December 31st of 2034, I can still go and buy a naturally aspirated V12 brand new from Ferrari, whoever. But then on next day, that's it. Actually, it's always planned to be transitional, with obviously year on year a larger proportion of the makers' cars having to be zero emissions. The problem is we have reached this cliff. There is a proper term for it. Somebody told me about the other day, and conveniently I've forgotten half of it, but it's basically the chasm, whereby the adoption has had a really easy time thus far, but it now has to go mass market. Now average Joe is supposed to be driving an EV, and it couldn't have come at a worse time, because the cost of electricity is through the roof, the cost of the cars is going up. There are an increasing number of things making their old car worth less, particularly if they've, say, got like a 10-year-old diesel that's no longer ULEZ compliant and so on, which means nobody wants their car. The price of EVs is actually falling dramatically. So if you want to buy a used one, it's actually a great time to buy one. But the problem is, if you want to buy a new one, I did some sort of quick, cigarette packet maths the other day and worked out that if you were to buy a new Tesla Model 3, which is generally a decent car, I think a pretty good standard bearer for your kind of normal electric car, you could be losing over the first 3 years up to potentially £1,000 a month just in depreciation. Now, that's quite extreme, and that may not necessarily be the case, but it's also potentially the case. So people are being told this is what you should be buying, but they're doing their own maths and going, actually, I know a lot of people that did buy into it early who have gone, it made sense then, it doesn't make sense now. Meanwhile, all of this is going on, the manufacturers are being told, we've got to sell more this year than last year.
Big fines.
Of course, if you are Tesla or BYD, whose entire output is EVs, this is not too much of a problem. But if you are a traditional car maker trying to transition to EV, it's problematic, because on the one hand you're being told your customers should be buying this, and on the other hand your customers are saying we don't want it. So basically the instruction from government is, it doesn't matter what they want, tell them to buy this. And basically, we've got this enormous butting of heads at the minute, with people saying, well, I don't really want one, and car makers saying, we can't force them to buy it if they don't want it. And every solution that a car maker has come up to thus far has made it a lot worse, because Porsche, for example, they're discounting cars by such an enormous amount.
Could you imagine yourself saying that 10 years ago, Porsche discounted cars, whereas 5-6 years ago, it just didn't happen with Porsche giving a discount on a car.
Well, 15 years ago they did, though.
Yeah.
It used to be in the 2000s that if you didn't get... there's an Evo magazine I remember reading, and they said if you're not getting at least 10 grand off your new 911, you haven't negotiated properly. And then suddenly that all changed, basically with Dieselgate, when Porsche became VW's cash cow. Now, I've heard rumours of 40 to 50 grand being knocked off new Taycans, which if you're in the market for a new Taycan is great. I just hope that you don't decide at any point during the finance deal that you want to sell it, because good luck to you. What this has also done, of course, is absolutely trashed the values of anybody that's already got a Taycan. There are a huge amount of businesses who bought into EVs, company directors that bought into them because, you know what, it didn't matter, it was a 100 grand car, it's an easy write-off. Well, that's changing. The incentives are gone. Benefit in kind is coming in, and of course the government is going to realise that if they're not getting the tax money out of fuel anymore, then they're going to want it from somewhere else, and they're going to realise, well, hang on a minute, we're losing all this revenue because of the reduction in sales of combustion cars, they keep reminding people there's this, what do they call it, 22 billion quid black hole in our public finances. They clearly want money, and this is going to be an obvious place to get it from. But I suspect behind the scenes there is an awful lot of panic going on, and I think a lot of legislators are maybe now slowly realizing that what they were trying to achieve is unfeasible. The problem, of course, is that, and as you'll notice, in any business, the worst possible thing is uncertainty.
It's flip-flop, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the fact that here we changed from having 2035 to 2030 as our cutoff date, that to me was just a combination of equal parts lunacy and arrogance, because 2035 was aligned with what they were going to do in the EU. To have this idea that somehow car makers were going to give little old Britain special treatment and bring their plans forwards by 5 years, which were already looking a little bit shaky and maybe hasty. And of course, then everybody started panicking and going, okay, crikey, we're going to have to try and change what we're doing. Then they said, actually, no, we're going to put it back. Now there's rumours that they're saying, okay, we've had a change of government, and they're saying, oh, actually, we might bring it back to 2030. Like, it's just stop. Just stop. 2035 is already looking tricksy.
Yeah.
And alongside all of this, we have this, I think, existential crisis going on, which you kind of mentioned a little bit, where caught in the middle of these German automakers who have been caught, as the Americans like to say, with their pants down. VW's ID cars did not go well. Everybody I know who works in the industry says they made a massive mistake with those. There are lots of fundamental issues with them that mean they just weren't the savior that they should have been. Of course, the American, Chinese, and Korean competitors are more than happy to come in and clean up from Germany and France's mistakes and so on. But I think car making for all nations is a big, important business. It says a lot about you as a nation. And I think these are industries that we want to protect. And of course, the easiest way you protect any of your industries is by introducing tariffs and the like. But you then have this contradiction of, okay, we're going to protect our car makers by making everybody else's cars expensive, but you were also telling people that they had to buy EVs, and if the only place they could afford one from was China, and you've now made it unaffordable. You have to realize, if you want somebody to do something, you have to make it either desirable or affordable. And basically, as far as I see it, if they actually want 2035 to really happen, they've either got to get some serious incentives going again, which I think is wrong, because it artificially makes it look, easier and better and cheaper than it is, or you've got to get massively punitive, which is just not going to work, of people doing the wrong thing.
Do you think then, on this point about almost legislation, electric, look, I'll put my hands up, and there is a bias there. I've had my whole career in liquid fuels, but do you think the symbolism of it will be that potentially, and I appreciate Lotus now have much bigger pockets because they're owned by Geely, but potentially that electric SUV from Lotus could be the symbolism that almost kills off a large part of that brand and company, and almost forget all the adverts and stuff. And I know you've done a video on this, but almost this big swing move for Jaguar to electric, potentially two of the greatest British brands in Lotus and Jaguar could be victims of the electric flip-flop on policy.
Do you swear on your podcast?
We can bleep it out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to be honest, both Lotus and Jaguar, if they carried on doing what they were doing, they were fucked anyway. Because Lotus has built itself a reputation as a car company that builds really cool, lovely things when they work, but they're weird, niche, odd little sports cars. And the fact that any company, it doesn't actually matter where they're from, the fact that any company bought them and thought they could turn them into a successful volume manufacturer virtually overnight was somewhat laughable to anybody that had ever been even remotely close to a Lotus anyway. Jaguar is more interesting because it had a lot more potential to do something interesting. And in some ways, I think what Jaguar is doing is actually exactly right, because what they're doing is they're going, okay, we're not going to chase volume anymore because, Jaguar currently is still nailed to the side of Land Rover. And, I could see Jaguar going, you know what, we're not going to try and compete with our own sister brand. If you want a cheapy crossover, whatever, go buy an Evoque or a Freelander or a Disco or whatever. I know Freelander's not a thing anymore, is it? But showing how up to date I am. But Jaguar just trying to sell what was effectively rebadged versions of Land Rover or Range Rover didn't work. However, so Jaguar going back to being a company that produces sexy cars that not everybody can afford. I've said for a long time, I think Stellantis, which clearly has some problems, their biggest problem was that they were trying to get all their brands to do things. Now, I think as a consumer, but also as a car fan, I don't want a cheap Maserati.
No.
What's the point?
Yeah.
You want a Maserati because you couldn't have one when you were 17. It's the same reason that Ferrari has never built a cheap car, because otherwise a Ferrari will lose a bit of what makes it a Ferrari. To give some credit to VW, even though the differentiation between their brands seems a little bit odd, we all know that you've got, Skoda, VW, Audi, say at the bottom alongside.
And you end up at Bugatti.
And you end up at Bugatti. So they've actually done the hierarchy really, really well. Whereas over at Stellantis, they got all a little bit confused. They got lots and lots of brands that don't seem to make much sense. And I think they're well aware of the fact they've got some problems. Jaguar, I desperately want them to do really, really well, but they have chosen the worst point in history to launch a really expensive EV. Had they done this 5 years ago, when company directors were buying Taycans, by the bucket load, if it was a case of you could buy your nice Taycan for 100 grand, or you can have this really sexy Jaguar for like 120, 130, they'd have sold. They'd have really sold, but it's too late.
Power Club, we will do our best to get JLR on because I think it's an exciting time and people want to hear the story. Recently, or last year, when the Grand Tour ended and Jeremy Clarkson, he had that line that I think struck a lot of car people about they are coming white goods. Now, I guess the counter argument to that is the hypercar guys are releasing some exciting stuff. McLaren are bringing out a new one. Ferrari have got the F80. Where do you sit? Is it white goods that Jeremy Clarkson's forecasting, or are you actually quite excited about what some of the big brands are bringing out from a technology performance sense? Where is the debate now on cars?
I dislike the notion that an EV basically must be a white good, that it's destined to be no more exciting than a fridge. I think the issue with a lot of EVs is that partly they're, I think, suffering from the fact that they're just modern cars. Yeah. And I think a lot of people feel the way about current EVs as they feel about current combustion engine cars. Yeah. They're extraordinarily competent, generally speaking, actually much better made than they were, 30 years ago, in spite of what people might say or think, filled with technology that somehow generally actually works. Some of it's really annoying, and actually the majority of problems that people like myself have with cars, for example, I hate the fact that when the thing turns on, it turns on all of its safety systems, which, living like I do here, surrounded by narrow roads and hedgerows, they are actually, I think, more harm than they are good. Yeah, ding, but ding, to ding. Then turn them off, you have to have at least 2 presses of a menu and everything. That's legislated. That's not the car makers, fault. They've been told that it's got to be that way. The new Ferrari hypercar sounds rubbish. Why does it sound rubbish? Well, it sounds rubbish partly because it's a V6 with turbos on it, but it also sounds rubbish because they've got no choice. They've got to meet increasingly stricter regulations and that sort of stuff. So I think the car in a lot of ways was kind of doomed to become a little bit more boring. What worries me is that we seem to be seeing this split in the market, whereas let's wind the clock back, say, 15 years or so, and you had your regular entry-level cars, and let's just talk about sports cars for a bit, because that's the exciting stuff that often gets in the news. you could start off with, your BMW 320, then you could move up to, say, like an M3, and that was cool, and then you could move up to, like, a 911, then if you fancied, you could move up to, like, a 911 Turbo, and then if you wanted to go beyond that, you could get yourself a Ferrari, 360, F430, 458, whatever it might have been at the time. But beyond that, you're talking there 100 to 200,000 pound cars, depending on what point in time you're looking at. Beyond that, there weren't many like hypercars or ultra cars or mega cars, whatever they want to call them. I found the other day an old Autocar magazine, and it's from about the mid 2000s, and in there you could have a new Zonda for, I think it was under 300 grand. Koenigsegg is like 350 grand. Now, the modern day equivalent of each of those is 10 times the price. But they're also not alone anymore. I mean, if you're a billionaire, you've never had it so good. If you want to spend 2 or 3 million quid on a car, the choice is endless. But if you're looking, but the problem with those cars, right, is that when I was a kid growing up, I looked at stuff like, say, the 550. Now, when the 550 was new, it was £150,000 in 1996. Now, in 1996, I was living in a house that cost half of that. But depreciation existed, and it was your friend, and you knew that, okay, all right, it's 150 grand now, but in a few years it's going to be more like 100 grand, and then a few years after that, with some miles on, maybe it'll be 50 grand. And at the time, an M3 was like 40,000 quid. So, and an M3 doesn't feel like it's impossibly far away.
Correct.
So you go, okay, well, one day I can have this, and it makes you excited. It makes you hopeful for the future. But when a car comes out, it's 2 or 3 million quid. Never, not ever. It's just not going to happen, is it? And I worry that this kind of aspirational, like, look, not everybody's going to have one, but maybe one day you could. Like the cars that, like 911 Turbo is like a really good example, in that I think if you're really, really into cars, you've got a damn good job, and you've worked hard through your life or whatever, or maybe you've not had kids, or the kids have gone off now or whatever, and you get to your 50s or so, and you get to your 60s, you can have one.
Yeah.
Either you get a new one or you save a bit of money, you get a used one, but you can have one. But now things are changing. People are making more money, but they're also making more money early. But that's not many people. You crypto billionaires in their 20s, who've made loads and loads of money, and they want to go off and buy Paganis and Koenigsegg's and everything else. But the ordinary people who are just trying to save and build and do stuff, I mean, a Ferrari 296 spec'd up is over 300,000 quid now. Because
I think also for me, what's missing is kind of in the middle. Like, I remember as a kid growing up, one of our next door neighbours had a beautiful red drop top RX-7 Mazda.
Yep.
You just don't really get that kind of car now that's kind of in that midpoint, as you said, reasonably a solid account or something. And it just feels that like that's kind of gone a bit.
What also happened is the classic car market got ruined by investors. When I was a kid, living in this house that was, in the late 90s, and we had a next door neighbour called Kerry, and Kerry had an old car. Now, because I was a kid at the time, I just remember it as Kerry's old car. Yeah. And I remember him getting so annoyed because, every time he tried to start it, half the time it wouldn't start. Then when it did start, it would set the alarm off. And then because his house and our house were on the same garage, when he set his smoke alarm off, it set our smoke alarm off, like it was a nightmare. One day my dad got so fed up with it, he went out and pulled the wires on the smoke alarm. Then he set everybody's smoke alarm off. It was chaos, right? And one day I said to Dad, Dad, what was that old car that Kerry had? Thinking it's going to be some like Austin 7 or some old Escort or something like that. I said, oh, it's a DB5.
Wow.
And at the time, I think the house is worth like 100 grand or something like that. And the car, I think, was worth, a fraction of that. I found out later you actually had 2 DB5s at one point.
Yeah.
Of course, now you want a DB5. Good luck to you. Older cars were cheap. I know stories of people that 20 years ago got offered. This is from Ratarossa, my good friend Scott.
Yeah.
He got offered a Dino as Part X on a 360.
The
It was
greatest deal that ever
30
happened.
grand then, now like 250 grand.
Yes.
So there were so many opportunities for people that wanted something. I got a model back there of a Lamborghini Aventador. Now, 20 years ago, okay, you couldn't have picked up like a Murcielago cheap because they were new,
No,
but you could have had a Diablo cheap. You could have even had a Countach relatively cheap. Even the Urraco, Yalpa, stuff like that. They weren't expensive. They were expensive to run, and we all knew that. But there was 100 different ways for you to get into a car.
I do know in the space of 10 years, the one person I do know that owns a Countach, they picked it up for less than 70k 9 years ago, and now it's 800 grand. And it's like crazy, that sort of thing from the investor. But we like to give our listeners hope on the Wolf Power Club.
Yeah.
And this leads nicely into the next discussion, James.
Yeah.
There's a lot of car and coffee events and amazing car events across the country. In 2025, I don't think, unfortunately, even if more of you subscribe, will we hit the hypercar budget. But I can go to some of these events. What should our listeners, potentially that love cars, passionate about cars, what should they look out for in the year ahead of great sort of either car and coffee or car shows that you would say actually should be on your list of must-do?
Do you know what? There's only two big events which are must-dos on my calendar. One of which is the Silverstone Festival, formerly the Silverstone Classic.
Wow.
And I go there with the Sporting Bears and do passenger rides for charity in one of the cars. Last year I did it in the F12. And I love that because it's a really direct way of getting people to be able to experience these cars.
Yeah.
There's one I go to occasionally, Kim Bolton, bizarre little show there. I love it. It's like half farm show, half car show. And there's a young lad who every time I'm there, he's there. And what he does is he saves up his money through the year and he turns up with like 500 quid in his pocket and just goes, I want to go out in that. 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 And his treat to himself for the year is spending a whole day going out in Ferraris and Porsches and McLarens and whatever interests him. And that warms my heart because that's lovely. And all the money goes directly to children's charities. So it's a win-win for everybody, I think. The other one that I go to, and I need to book my stand for it this year, you're welcome to join us, is Helmingham Hall, which is up sort of in North Suffolk. And I love that show because it's set in a beautiful country grounds. It's a good size. And it's one of those shows where you could turn up in some old coal-fired thing from the turn of the century, or you could bring a Veyron and somebody will be interested in it. Somebody will be excited about it. It might also have a little bit to do with the fact that they also get exclusively local food vendors who do really, really nice like gourmet stuff, because nothing riles me more than having to pay through the nose to get to Silverstone and then pay 10 quid for the world's most uninspiring sausage and bacon sandwich. It's a bit miserable. So I like that. But for your viewers, because I don't know where in the country they are, do you know what my best advice is? Get on your local Facebook groups and things, talk to your local car clubs, and find those little village green car shows.
Yeah.
We've got a few round here, and they're amazing because first off, there'll be people that maybe you know or who are in the local area. So if you want to do car stuff and socialise, there's a good chance that they will, because these bigger events, people will come from all over the country. And then the stuff that comes out of the woodwork that you might not know about, but actually has been living, a mile down the road from you for 20 years is amazing. The other show I need to give a special mention to is one called Rustival, which is run by the trio of Ian, aka Hubnut, and his partner, Miss Hubnut, Steph from iDriver Classic, and Matt from Furious Driving. And it's got to be, I think, one of the most inclusive car shows I know, which doesn't relate to just the cars, but the people as well. And it's the friendliest, nicest, just most warm and welcoming show you could go to. It's just full of passionate people, and the stuff you see there is a lot of it is like stuff that maybe when it was new was considered somewhat ordinary, but it's the sort of car that nobody saved.
James, That was brilliant. Great to hear. So, for our viewers who might not have heard, is that some of the circuits I took my two young daughters last year to Brands Hatch, 13s and under, are free. So I'd say look out for those events. I'd say I went to this small, as you say, sort of farm show meets car show, and someone had a Lotus Carlton there. That was like the car of my dreams. It had been banned in Parliament or debated because it was so fast. And yeah, I love all that sort of stuff. But it leads nicely to my next discussion area. People who watch your channel will know you're passionate about this sort of area, and people who don't watch your channel might not know, but you have had a few nice cars in your time. And the big debate that I love when you get to car fans, it's almost like a football derby, is Porsche versus Ferrari. I loved your videos where you did both sides of the debate. That was very egalitarian, I thought, James. But gut feeling, where are you on the Porsche and Ferrari debate? What's your real gut feeling, other than being Mr. Diplomat and Ambassador in sort of saying the pros of both brands?
I was going to give you a short answer, which I'll indulge you with. I would say that 30 years ago, seeing a Ferrari, doesn't matter which one, seeing a Ferrari was a special thing. It was a rare treat. And it was the same for Porsche. You know, it was... people didn't have Porsches in my village when I grew up. Like, first person I knew had a Porsche was my dad, and he got that sort of, you know, relatively sort of late into his career. As it happened, he actually had a Ferrari before he had a Porsche, because that was back in the good old days when, because it was an older Ferrari, that meant it was cheaper. Yeah. So, you know, when he bought a Ferrari, I think it was as an alternative to buying a 968.
Amazing.
You know, because a new 968, old Ferrari 328, same money, and he just went, well, you'd have the Ferrari, wouldn't you? I mean, you just would. And now for me, I was, I think, 7 at the time he had the car. I thought it was the worst car in the whole world because it didn't have a stereo in it.
Oh, that's a terrible car, yeah.
Yeah, so I was like, Dad, this car's shit. Like, when are you going to put a radio in it? You know, like, take me out in a BMW. You know, and so I think... today, it's become a little more complicated. Porsche, of course, through the introduction of their new models, but also just general expansion. They sell so many cars. Yeah. You know, since the Cayenne arrived, really, the Boxster started it. But since the Cayenne and the Macan arrived, and of course they sell in vast quantities compared to any of their sports cars, it's just not the treat that it once was. Yeah. I also have become, fairly well known for people that watch my stuff, very tired of the game that Porsche get their customers to play. Because the thing was, you know, you all wanted a Ferrari, but you wound up buying a Porsche because, you know, not only was it a lot cheaper, but also you could get one basically straight away. Yeah. Ferraris, you had to wait a long time to get one. And, you know, the Ferrari, you knew if you drove it at all, the value was just going to sink out the bottom of the thing. And with a Porsche, though, the Porsche was the Ferrari you could get in, use, drive every day, treat it like your BMW, and it would be fine. Now, in a lot of ways, Ferraris have gotten a lot better, and I think in some ways they don't deserve the reputation that they maybe had. And a lot of the time it's based on the reputation of stuff from the 70s. Like, yeah, sure, your 1970s Ferrari might not be as reliable as you think. There's a head from a 308 up here, you know, to prove that. But how many 1970s British cars were a bastion of dependability, you know?
Sadly, not my mum's Maestro.
No, and I've got a steering wheel from one of those up there. Yeah, it's... Ferrari have still managed to keep a little bit of that specialness, I think. I don't love the way that the company is going. Since they went public in like 2015, they've become a lot more focused on producing more cars. Yeah. And I think, again, a large part of what made them desirable is the fact that there weren't very many of them. Now, in the grand scheme of things, we're still talking, I think, about 15,000 cars a year that they make, so it's not vast quantities. But I just feel like they've lost a little bit of that luster and that specialness that they've had. In a lot of ways, they had to, because they wanted to sell more cars, and people expected things of them, you know, like, for example, you know, just that it would, you know, open when you walk up to it, and, you know, there are little things that being a small car maker aren't easy to do, you know, having a sat-nav system that works. If you only sell like a few thousand cars a year, like the cost of putting your sat-nav in a car is just extortionate. You're developing a system like that, and Ferrari, even still today, is a very, very small company, and I think people kind of forget that. But you know, the passion is, I think, there more with Ferrari. The other side of this, you know, yes, I've got Ferraris. I've also got a Porsche that I'm working on at the moment. The plus side, of course, of having a car that's a lot more common is there are a lot more parts for it, a lot more pieces for it. I can do stuff with it, and things that for my Ferrari, I would be going, oh no. Oh no! Oh my God! How much is that going to be? With Porsche, I just go. I phone up any number of places. I got a good relationship with like Design 911 and go, "Hey guys, I need some new brakes for the car." And they go, "Well, who do you want them from?" Because we got like 4 different choices for just your car alone. Like, do you want slotted? Do you want ventilated, drilled? You know, do you want this? Do you want this? Do you want this? You know, do you want to upgrade them? Do you want to do this? Do you want to do this? Like, there's a whole path that's been trodden by thousands of others. So, you know, if you want to use and drive and, you know, have every day, and it's going to be like your one and only car, like the Porsche, it just works. You know?
That's a very, very fair answer. We're sadly coming towards the end, so we've got a few quick fire questions here, James. But I'd just like to know, you know, something we always ask on the podcast: who in your dress book do you think would be great to talk about energy in 2025 on the podcast?
Energy in 2025. Oh, that, you know, that's a tricky one, because I think what's interesting, I would think you'd want to talk to somebody, and I couldn't name somebody. I would like to talk to people working at the forefront of batteries.
Definitely.
Because when a lot of people talk about EVs, you know, specifically is the area I know, they talk about their problems and issues with them. The fact is, most of an EV is just a car as you already know it. The 2 bits that are different are the battery and the motors.
Yeah.
Now, electric motors are brilliant because they're compact, lightweight, extraordinarily powerful, and versatile in a way that combustion engine just could never, ever be. But batteries are what is currently holding us back.
Yeah.
You know, and in society in general, if we can make some real breakthrough improvements in battery technology, this is going to be one of those things that moves the entirety of humanity forward by some step. You know, if we can come up with a battery that just does twice as well as we do now, big thing.
I won't spoil it for the listeners, but I can confirm in 2025 we will have a big battery expert on. And one of the most mind-blowing things they've told me in our pre-discussions before they're recording, the cost of batteries is coming down by 40 to 50%, and also their weight. So watch out and wait for that, listeners. Now, we've got a few quick fire questions. We're changing them a little bit today, so it's more relevant to a car expert than an energy expert.
You're very kind.
But what would you, just quick fire, in the year ahead, what would you want the government to do that's positive for the motorists?
I would like them to acknowledge the issues that are being had in the transition towards EV. And I think for me, the focus I would like is to be put on regulating and potentially capping the price of public charging.
Yeah.
Because the sole fact is that if you can have an EV at home and you have a driveway and you have access to cheap nitrate electricity and that suits your needs, it's brilliant and it's very cost effective. However, that is not a lot of people, and it's certainly not a lot of people in the cities, which are where EVs are of greatest benefit, I think. And so to make them, I think, viable, that's what really needs to be looked at. The cars themselves, like you say, you've got your man coming on soon. Battery technology is improving every day. The cars will fix themselves. And the best thing about EV technology is that even if you buy a 5 or 10-year-old Tesla, a Nissan Leaf or something, if we can get the cost of public charging down, you've improved all of the EVs that have ever existed. But it's that, like I said earlier, the worst thing is uncertainty. And I try and explain it to people that don't get it. Like, it's, you know, the price variation that I've experienced. You know, we saw fuel prices go up dramatically in 2021, you know, from like nearly £1 a litre up to like £2 a litre. But the equivalent in the EV world has been like going from £1 a litre to like £6 a litre. And I always say to people, like, could you imagine if you sort of turned up to your Shell station or whatever and they said, have you brought your Shell card today? No, I left it at home. They went, it's £5 a litre now. You're like, really? Like, why? Like, if you can sell it at £1.50, why am I paying a fiver? So there's lots of stuff needs to be sorted, but that's what I'd like to see.
I like it, James. And I also thought the editor of Autocar, I spoke to him, said it was like the government needs to focus on the equivalent of the people who buy the £8,000 second-hand car, do all the sort of school runs to it, all the nursery runs, and basically a way they can live with it. But moving on to the next quickfire question. We normally talk about where you'd invest in energy, but I guess you're not thinking about the next solar farm or heat installations. No. Where would you invest your money in the second-hand car market? Is there a little gem out there that you think actually not necessarily total value, because I know you don't like investors, but just for pure fun, bang for buck, you would say, guys, it's worth doing that in 2025?
You know what? I've done a little bit of this myself. I have bought over the last couple of years a few MGs, but the sort of last gasp, not classic MGBs or stuff. I bought an MG ZR, which I'm currently spending on far more than it's ever going to be worth, and I've also recently bought an MG ZS, which nobody on the channel has seen yet, but a super low mileage, like 36,000 mile example, which is in really, really good nick. And I think, if you want to buy a car, what you do is you want to buy one of those cars. It was actually a pretty good car, but there was something else that was just better. And so, like, people are always going to look after a Golf.
Yeah.
People are always going to look after a Mini, but like it's the other oddball stuff, the MGs of the world, the sort of Alfa Romeo 147s, stuff that you go, right?
Lovely
it's the sort of car you go, 147, and you go, I wanted one of those, but I just, couldn't justify it. And also
it had
the
that
cars,
cool door handle on the back glass.
and stuff like BMW Z3s.
Yeah.
Cars that are currently very affordable. To get one in really good condition is not much more money than getting one in terrible condition, but because they're relatively inexpensive cars, they're going to start disappearing at a massive rate over the next few years, until it will get to the point where the only ones that are left are either heaps that are not economically viable or really good ones. And it's the cars where people go, why are you saving one of those? Why are you spending money on one of those? Those are the cars to buy. Because
and I think we've seen in the last year, I think people would have been like 10, 15 years ago, why are you trying to save a Sierra Cosworth? And now they're like diamonds.
30 years ago, you spent £20,000 on a Capri. You were insane.
Now, just to finish, I really want to thank you for your time today. How can people follow you, watch you? I know you've got a huge audience anyway, but a lot of the energy directors on here will be interested about where the car passion is going, where our end users going. What's the best way to stay in touch with you, James?
Well, it is interesting, isn't it? Because you were in an industry and are in an industry that's like a supplying industry. Like nobody in history has ever just bought some fuel, have they? Like fuel's a bit like money, isn't it? Like money is the most useless thing in the whole world. Like if we had £1 million in cash right here, right now, we could maybe set light to it and probably keep ourselves warm for about 5 minutes, at the end of which we'd have a really big heating bill, and we would still be cold again. But you can only use it to turn it into something else. And of course, I think personally that a car is one of the best places to put some petrol. But it's. What was the question again?
It was basically how people keep in touch with you.
Yeah, that one. Sorry, I do get lost in myself sometimes.
But to answer you, James, in my industry, I would say people always want a hot shower. They always want to drive a vehicle with whatever power form it is, and it will need energy at some point. And they always want a warm house. So essentially, I think there'll always be roles for me.
So you'll be fine. As for me, I'm just going to try and keep talking about cars until everybody gets bored of them. And you can find me doing that on YouTube chiefly. The channel name is JayEmm on Cars, JayEmm. I would have just gone under my name, which is James Martin, but there's another James Martin out there who's much better known than me and also likes this car, so that kind of knackered that idea. So it's just JayEmm on Cars.
Brilliant. James, thank you very much for your time today. All of those on Wolf Power Club. We will be doing more car stuff. We will be looking at the battery technology, and it's a huge part of the industry. There's many questions to answer at the moment, but I think that JayEmm has opened us up to the world of his 400,000 subscribers today and basically telling us where the passions are. So, James, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks,
it's been an absolute pleasure. Cheers.